Yes.
So do you not want us to read the pages in between, like 167 and 201?
Did I put the wrong pages down? Oh, I see what I did. Everyone go back. I jumped the gun on this. 167 to 193. Do not. For saying something. 167 to 193. Okay, that makes it a little bit easier. Okay, Edie, yes.
For the reading quiz, will be allowed to the notes.
Up to the very moment I take the quiz. I'll take the quiz. The ones that did the quiz, you can. I think that's fair, right? For the reading quiz, they're really basic, so you know the truth. I'm not kidding. I try to make those, you know, the basic part of the book. And any questions from the video? Yeah, literally, where you guys quit, it is like the end of the Battle of Bunker Hill, which happened on Breed's Hill. Yes. Gotcha. If you know, yeah. I want people to do, I want you to do well on this quiz. Now, when we have our unit test, which is coming up in about a week, a little bit over a week, that will be much more difficult. And I will give you a review list. My plan is the review list. If I have it done, I'll give it to you tomorrow. If I haven't finished. And I will post it on Teams. Oh, that reminds me, if you have not signed up for the College Board, please sign up for that thing. All right, any questions from, yes?
Is the quiz over chapter 4 and chapter?
No, just everything up, all the terms up to page 193. So everything I think up to Lexington.
Okay.
And the quiz, I mean, it'll be literally, I'll pick like 8 things.
Oh.
All right, any questions from the worksheet? I know it's like this in videos, I give a worksheet and they'll answer like 3 in like 1 minute period, and you're scrambling. I understand that. That's why I'm going over it. And that's one thing when I'm here, I would stop it and you know, go through it. Because any ones we could not find. And the ones with notes, those are the ones I'm gonna talk about in class, and we just leave those blank. Any ones we could not find? Yes. Okay, 12, he saw them, King George. King George III saw himself as a constitutional monarch. He is obeying what they call the Constitution. That whole idea of a constitution was brand new at that time. And it's not one document, it's a series of laws from 1215 on. But he saw himself as a steward of the law. Now, we might see him as a tyrant in some ways, but that's what he saw himself. And Lord North was his most important minister of that era, sometimes called a prime minister. We talked about that earlier. There's Lord Grenville, Lord North, and he was basically carrying out the taxation to King George. You obey the king and the law. I am the law. They had Lord North, they had someone doing his voice, and supposedly he had this really nasally voice, and it must have been such a big deal that everyone knew about it. So he kind of talked like this through his nose. That actually kind of hurt to do. Part of the reason is because he had so much snuff. What are we on the phone? What are we doing? Typing it in. Huh? Oh, good through it. Good. He stored in so much snuff, that tobacco, it ate away his septum. So I guess it was constantly just like running, get down his face. Yeah, I know. I've been. Pleasant, huh? Hey, I'm talking like this. So I'm glad they did that in the video. There's another one we didn't know. What's the other one? Yeah, the Sons of Liberty, think of them like shopkeepers, not quite the lower class, but middle class people of Boston. And they rallied together against British laws. They're the ones who enforced the boycott. And the leader was a pretty big radical named Sam Adams. And Sam Adams, very early on, thought the only way for us to get our rights as Englishmen is to break away from England. And so he's going to be secretly and behind the scenes pushing for more and more action. direct action. So another one, yes.
What was the age of the plane?
And what number is that?
It's number 3.
Here, and they did not do, I know they said, the age of reason and great ideas. Let's get to the basic element of the Age of Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment was this idea that great minds could figure out natural laws for society. The scientific revolution had just happened. Newton had just done his Mathematica Principia about gravity, the mathematical formula behind gravity. And they thought they could take those ideas from the scientific revolution and put it to society, where we all have rights, and this is how we establish governments, create a constitution. All that came about then. So that was the Enlightenment, which you can see would be a pretty big backlash. Yeah. So even though he was a patriot, John Adams had a couple big reasons. One I'll tell you in class later on, but the one they mentioned in the video, if we are going to stand for liberty and equal protection under the law, so basically legal rights for everybody, then the soldier should have the best representation. We should, if we believe it, we should stand for our values. We should show we mean it. So. He had other reasons too, but Adams is an interesting guy. Yeah.
That the video didn't cover up any study.
They have notes behind it. Those are the ones that kept saying I would talk about them in class. And there are ones if I was here for the video, I would have stopped and I would have addressed them right there. But Mr. Kelly was here. And which I know he did a great job, but that's not it. So to talk about representation in Parliament, that was the whole thing. Taxation without representation. I mean, the colonies are saying we shouldn't be taxed unless we're represented in Parliament. But they never actually wanted representation in Parliament because they would be so outnumbered. Because there's so few people in the colonies, and they apportion districts in Parliament really unfairly. They would just have a few seats and they'd be outvoted. So they talked about that as an abstract idea. But what they really wanted, this is the thing, they really wanted the individual colonies to decide their own taxation. Give us our own representation. So just basically say, Parliament say, hey, figure out taxation and we'll decide ourselves. They didn't care so much about the taxation. Okay, they didn't want to pay the taxes, but the big thing was control. They wanted self-control. Another term of that would be autonomy. That's what they wanted. There's another one we didn't get. Yes.
Question number 2. How many people?
Did we get how many people lived? Yeah, between 2.5 and 3 million. And there was 1.5 million people approximately in 1740, 1745, and less than 20 years later, over 1 million more people. So the population was growing fast, partially because a little better food, it was cleaner than in Europe, cleaner than Britain. The Industrial Revolution was just beginning, and wow, was that changing cities? Yes.
Like that the American or the colonists' taxes were much lower, so why did they think that their taxes were okay?
For number 6. Okay, remember mercantilism? The whole job of mercantilism is literally to suck money out of the colonies. So the way the colonial point of view is that it's kind of a twofold thing. We have no money. And so even a small tax hits us if you have no money. And so that's their anger of mercantilism, and therefore that gets to we have no control over our fate. Because you're imposing this on us when we have no money. If you have no money, any expenditure is really expensive. That's why Montana is one of the few states that don't have a sales tax. And other states have sales tax, especially good place like, let's say, Washington State or any place in the South with massive sales taxes. If you've been to Seattle, it's an 8% state sales tax and a 4% city. I think it's 4% or 3.8 or something percent. That's a 12% tax. What kind of people is that just? Damn, that tax. Yeah, poor people. Or middle class people. Who likes that kind of taxation? The rich. Yeah, it's a drop in the bucket to them. Sales taxes. designed specifically so wealthy people don't have to pay taxes and working people do. Gee, I wonder who runs the government. Moving on, is there another? But that's what, to the colonists, that they saw themselves in that boat. So another one we didn't get to. What number?
20.
And,
Who were patriots.
okay, the Patriots are ones who wanted more and more separation. And they started calling themselves Whigs after a group in Parliament. WH. I Whig, you like it? All of it. You gotta see how fast I go. I told first grade that's why I'm this. Need time to recover. You've cut your hair. And so loyalists were ones who wanted to stay more loyal to Britain. And they were called Tories. Hope you like the video. One of my favorite parts are like the reenactors. So they show like Lexington and Concord, and so many fires are shot, and they must have told those guys, because they reenact those every year. And these are just regular people who are out there, you know, dressed up as British soldiers, you know, they just have fun doing it, whatever. And they said, okay, now some of you have got to fall. And they all go, ah! They all fall, a bunch of them fall together. I enjoy those when they show the reenactors. And things like that. But it's a good video, good historians. A few things it doesn't quite get, like it mentions one of the intolerable acts closed in Boston Harbor. Is that number 17? There's 3 more things I'll get to. And I'll just do those in class real quick. Any others? I hope you like that one. And so I put on there another one on this series, another worksheet, part 6. And that's one in the past, just things come up and I might have to miss another day. And if I do, I have something else. We might not watch it, but I have it ready. That's, you know, I kind of want things ready. Okay, so let's go put this away, take out your notes. I will answer those questions we had in notes. I put down for notes, and we got to the Treaty of Paris, right? When in doubt, you get a treaty on the test. You don't know the treaty, put down Paris. Yeah.
Okay, so is this the same kind of what we
Yeah, in the reading. And when I give the quiz, it's literally gonna be matching. And normally the way I do it for these, I want everyone to do well on the reading quizzes. Those terms would be like the choices out of triple explanation. It really is. In the test are multiple choice and essays. And we'll talk about essays when we get closer. I know you've written them. There's certain things I want. I know you are figuring this out. The person who assesses you always might have little different quirks and you have to adapt. You'll find out if that kind of not doing a good job and everything it's just life. So, did we get through all this? Did we finish the Treaty of Paris or did we talk about it all?
Yeah, we got it all.
So we got all this? Spain, Louisiana. What was the last battle where General Wolfe would be mortally wounded, but they defeated the French? Quebec. What was the battle where the British were humiliated right here? Washington led the rear guard, General Braddock would be mortally wounded? Yes.
Battle of Pontiac.
Yeah, okay. Bahanga, yeah. And I sympathize. And who was the Prime Minister of Britain who would organize the finances and then said the heck with the debt until we win? Yeah, Cleveland. And so with that, William Pitt. Did we get to this then? Not the results? Let's do it. The result. The French threat, and for some reason I capitalized that, but it was, I guess, a big deal. The French threat was gone. And with that, so much that would give Britain control would be taken away. Britain could always say, hey, you got to obey our laws. The French are gone, or the French will take you if you don't. But also all this land. And who's going to get it? Because everybody wants it. The people who live there want to keep on the land. And now, oh, there's only the British to worry about. The colonies, settlers, plantation owners, speculators. Next. The colonies, they actually kind of felt they won the war. We, to the colonial point of view, to the militia who are fighting up here and along the frontier, they didn't see hardly any British soldiers. To their point of view, they won the war. And therefore, we should be left alone. We won this land. Yes, we're going to take it. But the British, they actually were angry at the colonists. We had to save you again. Our taxes went up and you guys got away with this. And you're ungrateful, you're unruly. You're a bunch of hicks, you live on the countryside, you don't know anything. A lot of resentment against colonists. And then all that debt. It's coming. And therefore, those navigation acts, they're still on the book. Let's start getting that money. And what was it called when the British ignored the colonies? Salutary neglect. Yeah. So we're going to get it. And with that, here's a great map from that. Oh, so this new unit, this new heading for this thing for the next day and a half, the widening breach. The breach, the gap between the colonies and Britain. Part of the problem is they're going to misunderstand each other. They're going to exaggerate each other's position. And it's really a big deal about saving face. You know, once somebody said something, you got to do it. It's tough to back down. Regardless of how insane your position might be, it's hard to back down. That is from the Boston Massacre. So here's a map right after the Treaty of Paris. Another kind of an amazing map, isn't it? They were fantastic map makers. You have all these tribes along here now, and they're getting kind of desperate. Also, I love this part. So a few explorers went up here. They knew where the mouth of the Columbia was. And then I like how they just said, we assumed it went this way. So it's right here. We heard there was a lake, so they built a lake. I have no idea what they're, they heard it, so they just did it. And they didn't know what was here, so they just put dots. Yeah.
Not like an actual map, or it's great.
That is a copy of the map. So that is the map from like 1761. It's pretty darn good, isn't it? Like Hudson Bay. Henry Hudson, he was the first one went in here, went to about here. Then his crew, he wanted to keep going. His crew said, no, we're cold. Hudson said, no, you're going to continue to going. And so they said, okay, you can keep going. And they put him on a rowboat in the middle. Yes. And they left him. Still there. That's it. That's what 1615. But that's where it gets Hudson Bay. So we're coming to what's called Pontiac's War. Even though you'll see it in books and you might see it on the AP exam as Pontiac's Rebellion. And it's important to use these terms because war is much more appropriate, but the British labeled this. You can imagine what the tribes along, they call this area the Old Northwest. That was the Northwest. In fact, up until the 1870s or 80s, if you would have said, hey, where's the Northwest? I know that seems weird to our point of view, but this was the Northwest. And so these tribes, the British are coming. There's no French threat, and they know the colonists, their thirst for land, they're not going to stop. So now they're all alone. And all these tribes that were here, everybody from the Mingo and Shawnees up to the Ottawas up here, they had bickered and fought. Some helped the French, some helped the British, and went back and forth. Same with the Iroquois here. Well, the Ottawas formed a confederacy. Iroquois didn't really join. That really started to divide them. And now they're going to fight back against the British. So the British have been occupying some of these forts that were once French forts. And the British now, we could save money. They pulled back troops. The wars are over. Remember, they have been fighting constantly. They never quit fighting. And so they thought it's going to be a time of peace. And they attacked virtually every fort along the Great Lakes. Now, these are forts. Most of them are wooden stockades. Some are a little bit more elaborate. Like Detroit, and this is a picture of Pontiac's. Pontiac was a leading Ottawa, and so here's his siege of Detroit. And it was a stone fort. But most of them are wooden stockades. Here's supposed to be Pontiac right here. And But remember, they didn't have leadership of these tribes as one person in charge, but the British always just put a man in charge. And there's women who made the key decisions. And so that just, the point is a much more complex system. I have to keep emphasizing that. And they did capture some forts. Detroit held because, well, they didn't have artillery, for example. So it was kind of a stalemate. But the British are being driven back and they lost forts. There'd be some fighting in here and the Confederacy would lose, like around Fort Pitt. The point is this, the British are thinking, okay, now we have a little bit of time for peace to pay back our debt and there's more war. How do we, the word is appease or find something that the American Indians will accept to stop their attacks. What will they do? And we're not gonna talk about, and that's gonna be the proclamation of 1763. To appease the tribes and to end this war so we can pay back our debt, they decide we just give it to you. Now, the tribes are going to be told you're still under British control now, even though they're like, what? It was very confusing to them. No colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. So the 13 colonies who thought they had won the war are now being told your colonies end on the divide of the Appalachian Mountains, this land right here. And it was literally like somebody exploded an atomic bomb in the Confederacy, or in the colonies. They're just furious. Wait a second, we won that land fair and square, we're gonna steal it. It's ours to steal. So everybody's mad, everybody. The small farmers, or people who want to be small farmers, most of the land is used up, it's taken up to the mountains. To go about, we want to take this land. Plantation owners who are desperate for land, and the speculators like George Washington, who's both, they wanted this land, they thought they got it. They were promised this land if they fought in the militia, now we don't get it. But also the colonies themselves. Virginia, Connecticut, Massachusetts, they all claimed, North Carolina, they all claimed this land. New Jersey claimed all this. It was all these confusing land claims. They had claims. So Virginia wanted it. Everybody's mad. Everybody's mad in the colonies. Now you might look at this and say, and I think correctly, wait a minute, the British are actually kind of looking out for the people who actually live there and being more fair to them. But to the colonial point of view, they're stealing our land. They're stealing our land. Regardless of what is more just to the colonists, it's theft. And so we're not worried about the tax boards. Colonists just ignored them. They started moving as squatters. Squatters just came in and they had no legal under British law to this land. So they went to the land that was promised to the various tribes and just moved in. Now the Ohio River was really a boundary, and most of the tribes that fought were north of it. So they began to settle this area here. And my favorite is one of these land claims would be called Transylvania. And they actually talk about creating a new country called Transylvania. And I agree, it's sad it's not Transylvania. Nothing against Kentucky, but it would have been kind of cool, right? And Daniel Boone's probably the most famous of them. And there's going to be this whole mythology around Daniel Boone that's going to appear in the United States 1830s, 1840s to this day. About the brave settler. Here's one of the most famous pictures of him crossing the pass over the Appalachian Mountains called the Cumberland Gap. And they show him this, bringing the people over nobly to settle this wild country. Well, they're taken from the people who live here. But this whole thing about Daniel Boone, and some of you probably heard of Daniel Boone, he's going to become this big issue. But the other thing is, this is going to be a festering between Britain and the colonies. The colonies never forgot the proclamation of 1763. And patriots, men like Sam Adams, who want more direct action, and they're in Boston. He's not going to get this land, but he knows what to say, especially to the poor who want land someday to call their own. There's no land here, so here. So he could say, Hey, they just raised your taxes and took your land. Hey, they just gave a monopoly to a tea company and they took their land. They're quartering troops in your home and they took their land. They kept always coming back to them. So people in the colonies never forgot the proclamation of substances. It was always and they did this, and this always came back to them. It shows you're never in control. Britain will always dominate you. You're nothing but second-class citizens. You're nothing but slaves. Especially in an area that had real slaves. I know, but they knew what slaves were treated. Now, this would be part then of a settler myth that's going to happen. To glorify the taking of this land, you'll see in the 1830s, there'll be this whole thing about the settlers coming in and taming this wild wilderness, civilizing it. And this will go on to they had new publishing techniques in the 1800s, so these little novels about these brave settlers. The first movies are going to be about this and the Wild West. The first television shows are going to be about this. This whole myth. Here's really the only portrait of Daniel Boone. He has a beaver felt hat. And in fact, I found this, I thought this was kind of cool. When they painted this in 1820, it seemed so realistic that his parents and him, or his family and him, were shocked. It's pre-photography, so wow, that's me. So with that, but within 15 years, that would become a picture of Daniel Boone. And they made this mythology of the coonskin hat and the Wild West and the frontier. They created it back then to justify taking the land. And you see it to this day. The reason I'm mentioning this is because this would become a whole series of stories about him and someone who acted like him named Davy Crockett. And there'll be one of the most popular television shows called Daniel Boone. You can buy the lunch pail of this brand new thing called, you might have heard of it, called Walt Disney. And then this thing called The Wonderful World of Disney. And this would become one of the more popular television shows. Yeah. But you have to start doing this between periods, not again. And then with that, you can even buy coonskin hats and go along with it. Little soldiers, this creepy thing is a coonskin hat. And by the 60s and 70s, every little kid had a coonskin hat. That was like the thing to have. Davy Crockett was kind of a copy of that, so you have that hat. And so I thought these pictures were pretty funny of all the kids with coonskin hats. In fact, here's a kid you get a haircut with. You can have instead of having the hat, they could do it here.
How did you get that yesterday?
I tried. I asked for it. I said, give me the Daniel Boone, and she just looked at me. So, and all the coonskin hats. And yes, you can still buy one today. If you go online and look, you can buy coonskin hats. Yes, I have a coonskin hat. So, let's get back to real history. But that's actually the real thing, this whole myth. And so how many people, especially people my age and older, that's still to them the West. It's the Daniel Boone story, Davy Crockett, and it's not quite true. Or the reason why they're so mad about when people teach it. Britain's a constitutional monarchy. And the thing about Britain was, you have the king. He took power right after the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Now, it says 1820, but much of those last 30 years, he was completely incapacitated by mental illness. They basically had to keep him locked up and sometimes chained in his room. And it shows the problem with monarchies. You're stuck with, huh?
Everybody's in.
That's the thing. They're all inbred and you're stuck with whomever is born king. And so, ironically, the king, who was already losing power to Parliament, would lose a lot of power when they had to keep him in a padded room. Yeah, he completely just lost his mind. There's a couple different theories about what happened to him, but he was still relatively okay, but he had spurts of this weird irrationality even as early as the 1760s. Parliament, and this goes back to 1215 in the Magna Carta, they controlled the purse strings, which meant taxes. So any taxes the king wanted to do had to go through Parliament. And Parliament would vote on it. And eventually, because taxation is such a big deal, eventually Parliament's getting more and more powerful. If the king wants to do anything like, let's say, go to war, they got to go to Parliament. Pretty soon that means Parliament's going to have authority. And so that's what's happening kind of organically. The members of Parliament, well, there's two houses. The House of Commons are chosen by individual little boroughs. They're not picked by population. They were just kind of randomly, well, let me phrase that. Very wealthy lords got their own parliamentary district or borough. And there might be 5 people living there. That's fine. It's not divided up equally by a proportion of population. And then House of Lords, these are people who were noblemen. And they both had to agree to a law. It's not like that now, but that's the way it was. Why am I telling you this? Because we have 2 different groups in Parliament. They're not yet political parties. These are factions within Parliament. Now, the first one, the Tories. And the Tories were the old money, old country gentlemen, made their money from agriculture and then just owning land. It's called the rentier economy. And they wanted to keep things the way they were, AKA them on top. And they were really worried because there's pressures from all the change that's happening in the economy. By the 1780s, 1780s, they were starting to be called conservative. So they want to keep the old hierarchy, us on top and everybody obeying us down to the bottom. And there's already lots of hierarchies. We talked about racism. The loyalists in the colonies would be called Tories. Tories is a term from Ireland, just the landholders in Ireland. The new emerging wealth would be represented by the Whigs. And these are the new merchant class. They're making money through trade, and they live in cities, and they had shipping, and they're underrepresented in Parliament, and they wanted more rights for people. They wanted more political rights and economic rights. Now, they would claim for everybody, but what they really meant is for themselves. And those who wanted more liberty and or rights, that is where the term liberal comes from. Now, we will obviously come back to that. The conservative and liberal, those terms today come from this. Maintain and believe in an old hierarchy, that certain people are on top, you have a list. This one, not so much. They're going to be pretty divided. But still, that's it. To this day. The Patriots started calling themselves Whigs. But that's Parliament. That's Patriots within the colonies. Tories and Whigs in Parliament. The Tories, they're really worried about keeping their position. So they want to crack down and make sure that like trade is taxed, aka these new wealth, and the colonies. We want power. And the Tories would dominate this era. The Revolutionary War is going to be a Tory war. Whigs in Parliament are going to be like, you're going too far. They might rebel. William Pitt was a Whig. Boy, were they glad to get William Pitt out of office. Oh, one more thing. 1850s, 1860s, the Tories, for various reasons, started calling themselves conservatives. And that is what they are today. They are the conservative party. Even though you might see them called the Tories today. They are in power today. And it's old wealth. I mean, they are geared to pump money to the wealthy with the idea being they will establish more businesses. And then there would be a liberal. The Whigs would become the liberals. Workers would form their own party and eventually overtake the liberals called labor. But that's coming in the 20th century. So the majority, whoever is the majority group in Parliament, Whigs or the Tories, the leader of that party elected by members of Parliament. So the Whigs would come together and elect their leader. The Tories would elect their leader. And since there are more Tories, the prime minister would go to the majority. And that's the way it is today. The prime minister of Britain is not elected. Elected to prime minister. The prime minister of Britain is picked by the majority party. And he's And she is a member of parliament. Yes.
Is it like how we have a Senate?
Those are the people who actually decide and dictate, the calendar and what will be voted on in the House and the Senate. But they don't have any executive power.
Oh,
The prime minister does almost everything the United States president does, but they're a member of parliament. And our system is nothing like this. We have elements that are close, and virtually every country in the world that has some kind of democratic republic has something like this. And when the United States, like after World War II, helped countries create their governments, we did not push them to our form. We pushed them out. For lots of reasons. So that's what happened to Britain. I got to give a little bit of British history. That's Parliament. That's the King. What did I tell you they look like?
the 7
He's in his early 30s, therefore 13-year-old girl. Yep, that's just that's how they drew them. So their policy, mercantilism. The prime minister at first, before Lord North, was Lord Greenville. And Greenville was George Greenville, and there he is here. A lot of times they wore wigs, a lot of times they didn't, because wigs were really uncomfortable. But for portraits that you've seen with wigs, so you think everybody wore wigs. And he had debt. So they're going to end salutary neglect and start making them pay these taxes. Why I wrote that twice, I don't know. You don't need to write it twice. I really wanted to emphasize it. That's what the problems are in, right? And so bring back the navigation. The thing is, they knew that the colonies would go nuts if they just all of a sudden said, hey, we're going to tax or put a duty on all these things. So they thought, let's do it carefully. Let's be sneaky. And if we get away with this, then we can do more and more. And so the first one is going to be the Sugar Act. And this is kind of like the old Molasses Act. The Molasses Act restricted rum. Well, rum is now a big business. And let me throw a town on you. Boston. So the Sugar Act, there was a tax on the sale of sugar. So what they did is, from the old navigation acts, they cut the tax, which is called an excise tax. So it's the same thing, just a tax. They cut that tax, but they didn't enforce the law. Before 1764, they weren't enforcing the law. The laws were on the book, but everyone was just ignoring it. So to the colonists, it was a tax hike. And Britain, I mean, they really tried to sell it as, hey, your taxes, why are you complaining? We've never paid it before. I don't know. Political cartoons were becoming a big deal. They draw them and then print them out really quick. I'm printing, tap these things out. They're all really creepy, all of them in this era, and they're awesome.
Is the vendor one supposed to be?
That's King George.
Oh, really?
And they're sipping on tea with sugar in it, and it says anti-saccharide. So it's about saccharin, sugar. I don't know what she is.
It's Paris Hilton.
Probably a little before Paris Hilton. And these are supposed to be the colonists upset. It's creepy. I don't get them, but they were the rage. All they know is King George, yee. This is going to be, therefore, an indirect tax on rum. If you put a tax on sugar, that raises the tax on sugar. Therefore, everything made from sugar will go up in price. But we see this today. If oil prices go up, that means everything that involves oil, the prices will go up. So even though gas prices and oil prices are dropping pretty dramatically right now, you might remember a couple months ago, prices were going up really fast. And so that means what's going to happen to the price of food? More to ship it to market, and it's be a little bit like gas prices might go up in May, but the prices of food will go up in August. It'll take a couple months for it. And that's why gas prices are dropping really fast now. I know that might still seem high, but it's dropped a lot. Food prices are still relatively high. There's a Prices are kind of sticky, but they should drop a little bit. We see that with everything. Everything made with petroleum will go down in price eventually. What's made from petroleum? Almost everything. You're sitting on things made from petroleum. Have anyone taken an aspirin or an Advil or vitamins? Where do you think those come from? Do you want to guess what artificial flavoring and coloring are? Petroleum. You know what natural flavoring and colorings are made of? No, they're natural. Natural, all natural means it's not petroleum. They're made from bugs. Okay, moving on. So we see natural flavors. What would you rather eat, bug or petroleum? I kind of like the taste of oil, but now it didn't affect everybody. Price went up a little bit, but who it affected were the shippers. All those people who were trading, owning ships and avoiding the tax. They were smugglers. Even though they saw themselves as noble, law-abiding citizens, they were avoiding the tax. They're getting hit. They got to pay more. And so they're mad. Some of the early patriots, the smugglers who didn't want to pay the tax. The best example would be this guy named John Hancock. He was a smuggler. He got rich smuggling. So Britain also passed, including the law, a writ of assistance. And this will be for the rest of the time of the Revolutionary War. This is the blanket search warrant. So Britain already had in their own Bill of Rights, that this time was 7 years old, that there must be a warrant signed by a judge if they're going to search someone's possession or in Britain. This is a blanket search warrant. And all, let's say the Royal Navy did, the look for smugglers did, is they just needed, I have a writ of assistance so I can search anything I want for any reason. Now it was designed to stop smuggling, but very quickly it became a way to shut people up. You just imagine if I had the power to search everything you have anytime I want. Just imagine what that would do to you. First, what a great way to get rid of my enemies, right? So you're looking at me. I would search your stuff until you finally just move on. Or if I could search anything you have, what are you going to do? And you don't know what might happen if you're caught with something I don't like. Remember, it's blanket search warrant. How will you act? The way you think I want you to act.
Yeah, if you did that, I think I German.
With what?
I Germans that like.
German.
Yeah.
Everybody blames the German. Okay. So, who do you think they searched? What a great way to shut the patriots up. You just bug patriots. And everybody knew this is a way of control. You are living in a police state if you have that. So, James Otis in 1661, and he's mentioned in the video, would write about this and how this taxation would be a way to control. And he's the one who would coin the term no taxation without representation. You are taxing us and we have no voice. You're passing laws like the writ of assistance and we have no voice. We have no voice or control over our life. And that would be key. So here are smugglers avoiding the tax. Now, James Otis, he is not saying, like I said before, we do not want Parliament or people in Parliament. We want to represent ourselves. Autonomy. And so there's James Otis' statue in Boston. So in 1764, Parliament passed the Currency Act. Now to them, this was a very logical act. In Parliament, or in the colonies, they had every type of money and currency they had. So remember, currency is any kind of paper money that the government says is backed by the value of our state. What is gold and silver coin called again? That the actual value is in the coin itself. Specie. There are dollars called dollars now in the colonies. There are Spanish pesos. There are individual colonies putting out paper currency. There's British paper money, which are essentially like, think more like a check. And then there are gold coins from all over. It's just this hodgepodge of money all over. And no set currency, but Britain has to pay back their debt and they want gold. And so what Britain did is they said, no colonial currency. You can't print your own money. The inability to control your money supply, you're an entity like a state, AKA a country, means you have no control over your financial system. You can't control your money. You can't control your debt, your finance, the value of money. You're at the mercy of somebody else. And on that happy note, well, I should have colonists just went nuts. What? All right, so they're off. And then tomorrow we'll finish this up. Oh, yeah. Yeah, watch videos, we notes, I'm not gonna sign any more reading. We got that clean Monday, no sweat. Stop recording.